I'll never forget the first time I stepped into the world of Elden Ring. As a longtime Soulsborne fan, this was the game I had been waiting for a long time. And when I finally booted it up, wow, the world was beautiful. The scale was huge. This was the most realized FromSoft title I had ever picked up in my life. And yet, something was missing. After finishing up the DLC, almost on a whim, I found my old Dark Souls 3 case gathering dust and booted it up, hoping for a little hit of nostalgia to scratch the itch that Elden Ring had left. And almost instantaneously, as though a light bulb had gone on in my head, I realized exactly what was missing from Elden Ring. Tension. Let me explain.
My feet are here firmly planted. I am the Lord, and this is my throne.
You'll face death, and it won't be pretty. Enough death to leave you broken, time after time.
Tension is an invisible force lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike when you least expect it. In Dark Souls 3, this tension is not just felt, it's lived. Every dark corridor, every twisting staircase, and every eerie silence in the game contributes to this pervasive sense of unease. From the moment you awaken as a newly resurrected Ashen One in a desolate graveyard, a strange gnawing feeling takes hold. The short tutorial does little to prepare you for what lies ahead. It's just enough to familiarize you with the basics before you're thrust into an unforgiving world, left to your own devices. The gameplay loop in Dark Souls 3 may be simple on the surface. Enter a legacy dungeon, face the threats within, and battle your way to that area's boss. But this simplicity is really deceptive. Every step you take in these dungeons is laden with risk. You're constantly managing your health, your healing items, and your currency, the souls that are crucial to leveling up your character. As you progress, the tension mounts with every new boss encounter, every new hidden threat, and every area that you come across. The genius of Dark Souls lies in its ability to build this tension without ever feeling contrived. Unlike most games that hold your hand, guiding you through challenges with ample checkpoints and hints, Dark Souls 3 does the opposite. You have a limited number of heals, and your hard-earned souls are always at risk. Die once, you have one chance to reclaim them. Die again before you can reach them, and they're gone for good. Every decision you make, whether to push forward or retreat back, whether to use a healing item or conserve it for later, carries weighty consequences, further building up that feeling of tension and anticipation as you move forward. The world of Dark Souls 3 is unforgiving. And it's this unforgiving nature that creates a tension unlike anything else in gaming. It's a tension that makes every victory feel earned and every defeat a bitter lesson. As you progress through the game, you'll encounter hordes of enemies, each one capable of ending your journey in an instant. Ambushes lurk around every corner, and the game's environmental design is tailored to catch you off guard. More often than not, by hubris or sheer bad luck, you'll fall victim to a well-placed trap or a sudden attack, sending you back to the last bonfire with nothing but your memories of what exactly went wrong. FromSoft's approach to creating this tension is, admittedly, really unique. Other games often aim to make the player feel as powerful as they can as soon as they can. But games like Dark Souls 3 take the opposite approach. It constantly reminds you of your vulnerability, forcing you to respect the world around you and not take anything for granted. The limited healing items, the ever-present risk of losing your souls, and the knowledge that death can come at any moment build up a psychological strain that keeps you on edge throughout the entire game, only ever let up in areas of bonfires or your own player hub. This is the tension that Dark Souls 3 is known for, a relentlessly oppressive atmosphere that just never lets up. It's a tension that turns every encounter into a battle for survival, where even the smallest mistake can be costly. There is no enemy in the game that you can take for granted, especially the dogs. Hate the dogs. And it's this tension that's really missing in Elden Ring. Don't get me wrong, Elden Ring is a phenomenal game in its own right, but it lacks that same sense of dread, the same psychological strain that made Dark Souls 3 such a nerve-wracking but also memorable experience. You'd probably argue that Elden Ring has most of these mechanics I mentioned along with Dark Souls, and in that regard, you would be correct. But the one thing that Dark Souls does much better than Elden Ring is arguably the most important factor, and that is atmosphere is very important when fleshing out a game and creating a certain vibe and ambience. And that is one thing that Dark Souls 3 nails in almost every iteration of its formula. In Dark Souls 3, sound is a tool of tension, used as much to unsettle the player as it is used to guide them. Take the distant clanking of armor, the whisper of wind through decrepit structures, and the echo of your own footsteps in an empty corridor are all crafted to build this sense of vulnerability. The subtle audio cues are not just background noises, they're a part of the game's psychological warfare, keeping you alert and anxious. When you hear the distant growl of an enemy, it's a warning that something is lurking, waiting to strike. You'll notice it as soon as you start playing the game, because there is no background music. The only accompanied sounds are the ambience of wind, water, or fire, and other enemies roaming around. It builds a sense of anticipation when you hear enemies before you ever actually see them. Take the moment with the lead up to the Abyss Watcher's boss fight, where before you enter the arena, you can already hear the clanging of blades from the inside, building expectations that whatever is inside is not waiting for you, but in fact has already started without you. And no other game, as far as I know, in the history of FromSoft has ever attempted to do something similar. And that's why this moment lives on in my head as one of the most iconic moments in the game, because it builds up to this climax when you finally go through the door and look at the cutscene and realize that, oh my god, shit is about to get very real. Another moment that comes into mind much later into the game is when you find the area leading up to the consumed King Osiris's boss fight, where you can always hear this faint sound of painful screams somewhere in the distance, further driving up the tension and anticipation of the scene before we ever get close to the boss. In contrast, Elden Ring offers a more grandiose soundscape, with sweeping orchestral music accompanying your exploration of vast open landscapes. There's a constant background music no matter where you go in most areas. While this adds to the epic scale of the game, it lacks that intimate, oppressive sound design that originally made Dark Souls 3 such an unnerving experience. The grandeur of Elden Ring's soundscape can also make the player feel more like a hero in an adventure rather than a survivor just trying to cling to life. Then comes the lighting, which is, first off, extremely well done in Dark Souls 3. The game often plunges you into darkness, forcing you to tread carefully, your vision limited to the faint glow of your torch. You never really know what's surrounding you. The darkness is not just a visual challenge, it's a psychological one. The unknown threats that lurk in the shadows keep your imagination racing, and every step forward feels like a leap of faith. The strategic use of lighting, or lack thereof, means that you never know what dangers lurk just beyond the corner. There's many areas of the game that are purposely poorly lit to build up that sense of dread and anticipation to further immerse you in this harsh landscape. One notable example is the Airthil dungeon, arguably the creepiest location in the game, with some of the most otherworldly and bizarre enemies in the game, and the lighting contrast of dank, dark cells with the glowing red soldering iron of the jailers that take away your health builds this place up as a place of torture and misery, only fueled further by the fact that the level design on top of the poorly lit area is purposefully made so to make the player feel lost and confused. You never really know where to go the first time you come here. There's even a notable boss that utilizes this when, at the end of the Catacombs of Carthus, You touch an ominous-looking skull cup, and you're instantly transported to this pitch-black area with no idea of what's ahead of you, only for you to slightly start exploring, and suddenly there's a giant skull face in the room as the music crescendos you into a boss fight. I'm pretty sure many a pair of trousers were probably ruined the first time they encountered this moment. And though the boss is relatively easy and more of a gimmick boss, the moment leading up to the fight itself was masterfully done. In Elden Ring, however, the use of light is pretty different. The game's more open environments are often bathed in sunlight, reducing the sense of confinement and danger. While there are still dark places to explore, they don't carry the same weight of dread as the suffocating darkness of Dark Souls 3. A notable example is Caelid, which on paper sounds like an awful place to be, but the way it's lit doesn't leave much to be imagined, as you can almost see all the way to the further horizon, kind of killing that sense of tension which should have been very prevalent in an area like this. The only exception in Elden Ring came not in the base game, but the DLC with the Abyssal Forest area, where the sense of dread is highlighted by that dark, frenzy-covered forest. But apart from that, the game's direction chose to focus more on aspiring awe at the grandeur of the world rather than Dark Souls 3's feeling of hopelessness and dread. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad game, but it's a creative departure from what many like myself originally fell in love with. That was the dark, moody aesthetic of Dark Souls 3. Moving on to music, or its absence, which plays a critical role in Dark Souls 3. After all, this game is known for its sparing use of music, often reserved for boss battles alone, which honestly amplifies its impact. The lack of constant background music means that every sound stands out, contributing to this game's eerie atmosphere. When the music does play, it's haunting and intense, signaling that you're in a situation of immense danger. And it's almost exclusively always in the boss fights. It's insanely well done, the music in this game, to make you feel like you're a part of this extremely tragic world where everyone is just at the end of their existence. One of my favorite examples of music being used to strike genuine fear into the hearts of players is when you encounter Pontiff Sullivan for the first time. Entering his arena, you suddenly hear the slow buildup of a choir, adding more and more voices as the enemy stands at the far end completely motionless. Like he literally doesn't move an inch until you get to a certain distance, and even then, he's just slowly and menacingly walking towards you until his blade suddenly catch fire and he leaps directly at you, just as the music reaches its peak point in the start. And it caught me and probably a lot of players off guard the first time, really building up that sense of tension about what's about to go down. The entire fight is amazing, with no small part due to the music that builds up this boss as someone to be feared, especially when the music suddenly goes into overdrive in his second phase as the Pontiff is now holding nothing back. And the way this fight got my heart racing was second to none, probably other than the Nameless King. And it's arguably one of the best atmospheres of any boss fight in the game. Now compare that to something in Elden Ring, which, to be fair, is beautifully composed. But for some reason, it never really hit the same level of iconicness for me as the original Dark Souls series. It's hard to explain why, but there was just something about the atmosphere of Elden Ring's music, especially the boss music, that just didn't hit that same level of memorability as Dark Souls 3. Each of these elements, sound, lighting, music, is carefully crafted in Dark Souls 3 to maintain an atmosphere of unease and unpredictability. Together, they sort of weave into themselves this tapestry of tension that keeps player on edge throughout their entire journey. And while in Elden Ring these elements are still present, but are adapted to fit the game's larger, more open world, which kind of dilutes the intensity of them and leaves some players yearning for that nerve-wracking experience that Dark Souls 3 delivered so masterfully. In Dark Souls 3, the world is a maze of interconnected paths, each one with its own danger and mysterious atmosphere. The game's level design is a masterpiece of tension building, where every new area feels like an uncharted territory that must be carefully navigated. The art style of this game creates this unnerving scene of death and decay as you explore the remnants of a dying world on the brink of collapse. It leans heavily on the aesthetic of dark fantasy, which is prevalent in manga and anime art design in the late 90s, where I'm guessing creator Miyazaki clearly took inspiration from. Even areas that seem normally beautiful from a distance, such as the first time you enter Irithyll, only get more and more horrifying the more you explore and realize the state of the world and its inhabitants. Each area is designed to keep the player on edge, with enemies lying in wait, just out of sight, traps around every corner, and the ever-present fear of what might be lurking ahead. The world design creates this sense of intimacy between the player and the environment. You're not just passing through these areas, you're surviving them. The lack of hand-holding means that every shortcut you discover, every bonfire you light, feels like a hard-earned victory. The world of Dark Souls is unforgiving, but it's also deeply rewarding, creating this sense of tension that's exhilarating and terrifying, and contrasting that to Elden Ring, which does, to be fair, present a vast open world on a grand scale, and its beautiful, sprawling atmospheres that you can roam freely. However, this openness comes at a cost. While the sense of adventure is heightened, the tension is diluted. Anything you face that you can't directly handle, you can just, most of the time, get on a horse and run away, level up, and then come back to it. The constant availability of your mount to quickly escape danger lessened this feel of vulnerability that defined the Dark Souls 3 experience. While Elden Ring offers a different kind of thrill in its exploration, it lacks the same intensity and pressure that makes Dark Souls 3 so tense. The world of Elden Ring is a place to be explored, after all, while the world of Dark Souls 3 is a place to be survived. That distinction is crucial in understanding the difference in between the two games. And of course, we have to talk about the combat. In Dark Souls 3, much like most FromSoft games, combat is more than just a series of button presses. It's a mental and emotional ordeal. Every swing of your sword, every dodge roll, every block or parry, it has to be carefully calculated. The enemies you face are not just obstacles to be overcome. They're predators, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Each encounter is a battle of wits, as much as it is a test of reflexes. You can't afford to be reckless. One wrong move can lead to a quick death, sending you back to the last bonfire, all of your progress erased. This meticulous approach to combat is what makes Dark Souls so tense. You're always aware that the margin for error is razor thin, especially when you're starting out. Boss fights in particular are grueling tests of endurance and patience. These battles are designed to push you to your limits, with each boss having their own unique set of moves, patterns, and tricks designed to catch you off guard. Victory is never guaranteed, and defeat is always a looming threat. In contrast, Elden Ring offers a more varied and expansive combat experience, with a wider array of weapons, abilities, and strategies available to the player. And again, coming back to my previous point, the more open world approach to Elden Ring means that if a certain boss fight is too difficult, you can always go back, explore, level up, and then come back when you're ready. While this variety definitely adds depth and flexibility to the gameplay, making it much more easy for newcomers and casuals to play it, it also lessens the tension. Because in Dark Souls 3, you have no choice. To progress further, you have to beat a boss. Sure, you could go back and level up, but it's going to be a grind and a waste of your time, considering that you're not going to be able to collect as much as you would need. So it's either sacrificing time or just trying to figure out a boss. These are your only two options, and it is a tense decision to make. The combat in Elden Ring is thrilling, but it lacks the same nerve-wracking intensity that makes every encounter in Dark Souls 3 feel like a life or death struggle. Dark Souls 3 isn't just a game. It's an experience that stays with you. A tension that pervades every aspect of its design, from the soundscapes to the world's layout to the brutal combat, creates this insanely unique atmosphere that I have not seen many games after replicate. This is a game that demands your full attention, where every step forward feels like a risk, and it is beautifully well done. Elden Ring, for all its brilliance, offers a different kind of experience, which I understand. They want to get more casual players into Souls games and Souls-like games, but I can't help but feel that there was something lost from that original atmosphere and design that made Dark Souls 3 such an iconic game. I mean, not just Dark Souls, look at games like Bloodborne, look at games like Sekiro. All of these games share one thing in common. There is a tension, a constant tension that causes players to need to focus on this game, further building up your immersion, giving you this sense of anticipation. Because when I think about moments that truly made my heart race, that kept me on the edge of my seat, leaning ahead, just trying not to die, I always think about Dark Souls 3, a world where tension is not just an element of the game, but the very essence of the experience itself. Hey guys, this has been Us from Dope. Thanks for watching, and if you made it to this point, thank you so much. And I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you really liked, because we are at 800 subs at the time of this recording, and I'm trying to get to my first 1,000, so hit that subscribe button if you want to support the channel. And for anybody who's been watching for a while, I hope you like that one, and comment below if there's a game you want me to cover next. Again, this has been Us from Dope. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.